The sun dipped low behind the jagged peaks of the Cascade Mountains in Washington state, casting long shadows over the dense evergreen forest that blanketed the hillside. It was late spring, and the air hummed with the subtle symphony of nature awakening. Chirping birds flitting between the ferns, the distant rush of a creek carving its way through moss-covered rocks, and the occasional rustle of leaves stirred by a gentle breeze. This stretch of wilderness, just a few miles from the outskirts of a small logging town called Mill Creek, was a haven for wildlife, but it could turn treacherous in an instant, especially at dusk when visibility faded like a forgotten dream. Deep in the underbrush, a tiny fawn no bigger than a golden retriever puppy trembled on spindly legs. Her coat, still dappled with white spots for camouflage, was matted with mud from her frantic scramble through the thicket. Born just weeks earlier in a hidden meadow nearby, she had followed her mother faithfully until a sudden storm the night before had separated them. Thunder had cracked like gunfire, lightning illuminating the sky in stark flashes, and in the chaos, the doe had bolted one way while the fawn, paralyzed with fear, had frozen and then stumbled the other. Now, alone for the first time, hunger gnawed at her empty belly, and the chill seeping through the canopy made her shiver uncontrollably. Her wide, dark eyes scanned the dimming woods, ears twitching at every snap of a twig, searching desperately for the familiar scent of her mother. Miles away, in the cozy glow of a cabin on the edge of the national forest, Sarah Jenkins sipped her evening coffee, staring out the window at the encroaching twilight. At 32, Sarah was a park ranger with the U.S. Forest Service, her days filled with patrolling trails, educating hikers, and enforcing the quiet rules that kept this slice of paradise intact. Her husband, Mike, a local firefighter, was out on a shift in nearby Seattle, leaving her with their 2 rescue dogs, a lab mix named Buddy and a stubborn beagle called Scout, for company. The cabin, a rustic A-frame they'd bought 5 years ago as a weekend retreat, had become their full-time home after Sarah's promotion. She loved the solitude, the way the forest whispered secrets at night. But tonight, something felt off. A faint, eerie bleat echoed from the woods, carried on the wind like a child's cry. Sarah set her mug down and grabbed her binoculars from the windowsill. Peering through the glass, she scanned the tree line, her ranger instincts kicking in. It wasn't the first time she'd heard a fawn's call. Deer were plentiful here, mule deer mostly, with their oversized ears and cautious grace, but this one sounded weaker, more insistent. She slipped on her hiking boots, the worn leather creaking familiarly, and called to the dogs. "Stay put, you two. Mama's just taking a quick look." Buddy whined at the door, but she scratched his head reassuringly before stepping out into the cooling air. The gravel path crunched under her feet as she headed toward the forest's edge, her flashlight beam cutting through the gathering gloom. Flashlights were standard issue, but she always carried an extra in her pack, along with a first aid kit and her radio, just in case. The bleating grew louder as Sarah pushed through the salal bushes, their glossy leaves brushing against her jeans. The forest floor was a carpet of pine needles and fallen branches, damp from recent rains, and she moved carefully to avoid twisting an ankle in the uneven terrain. About a quarter-mile in, she spotted it. The fawn, huddled against the base of a massive Douglas fir, its body quivering as it lifted its head toward her. Those eyes, huge liquid brown, filled with a mix of terror and hope, locked onto hers. It let out another plaintive cry, staggering forward on wobbly legs, as if begging for salvation. Sarah's heart clenched. Orphaned fawns weren't uncommon in these parts. Predators like coyotes or even well-meaning but misguided humans could spell doom for the young and vulnerable. But this one was so small, so alone, it tugged at something deep within her, a maternal pull she hadn't felt since her own miscarriage 2 years back. Kneeling slowly to avoid startling it, Sarah extended a hand, murmuring softly, "Hey there, little one, it's okay. I'm not gonna hurt you." The fawn sniffed the air, inching closer, its nose twitching at the unfamiliar human scent mixed with the salt of her skin. In the wild, does left their fawns hidden for hours at a time, returning only to nurse. But this one had clearly been abandoned longer than that. Sarah's mind raced. Protocol dictated calling wildlife rehabbers, not intervening directly. but the darkening sky and the Fawn's weakening stance made waiting feel like a betrayal. She radioed her supervisor back at the station, her voice steady despite the lump in her throat. "This is Jenkins. Got a possible orphaned fawn out here on the East Trail. It's in distress. Requesting advice." The response crackled through. "Copy that, Sarah. If it's imminent danger, stabilize and transport to the rehab center in Everett. We'll have a vet on standby." She nodded to herself, slipping off her jacket to create a makeshift sling. The fawn didn't resist as she gently scooped it up, its body warm and fragile against her chest. It nuzzled her arm, a tiny tongue flicking out in exhaustion. Carrying it back to the cabin took longer than expected, the weight pulling at her shoulders. But the forest seemed to hold its breath, the crickets falling silent as if witnessing a quiet miracle. Before the story goes deeper, make sure to subscribe for more narratives like this. Back inside, Sarah laid the fawn on a blanket by the fireplace, its chest rising and falling in shallow breaths. She warmed some goat's milk, kept on hand for just such emergencies, from the fridge, and offered it via a bottle from her emergency kit. The fawn latched on weakly at first, then suckled with growing urgency, milk dribbling down its chin. Buddy and Scout watched from across the room, tails thumping curiously but obediently staying put. Sarah sat cross-legged beside it, stroking its soft fur, wondering about the mother out there somewhere, perhaps searching in vain through the endless trees. The clock on the wall ticked past 9 p.m., and the forest outside pressed against the windows like a living wall, dark and impenetrable. Little did Sarah know, this rescue was just the beginning of a night that would test her resolve, unravel hidden dangers in the woods, and forge an unexpected bond that would change everything. As the fire crackled, casting flickering shadows on the log walls, Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from Mike. "Home late. Love you." She smiled faintly, but her eyes never left the fawn, now dozing fitfully. The wilderness had a way of demanding payment for its gifts, and she sensed this story was far from over. The hours stretched into the quiet hours of the night, the cabin's warmth a fragile bubble against the encroaching chill of the forest outside. Sarah watched the fawn sleep, its tiny flanks rising and falling in a rhythm that seemed too fragile to last. She had named it Willow in her mind, after the slender trees that lined the creek beds nearby, though she knew better than to get attached. Wildlife rehab was a world of temporary miracles, where survival rates hovered around 50% for orphans like this. But Willow's eyes, when they fluttered open earlier, had held a spark of trust that pierced straight through her professional detachment. She checked her phone again, no updates from the rehab center in Everett, just a confirmation that they'd be ready at first light. Transporting a fawn in the dark wasn't ideal. Roads twisted through the mountains, and headlights could disorient the little one further. Sarah busied herself by preparing a shallow box lined with towels, padding it with an old sweatshirt that smelled faintly of pine from her last patrol. The dogs had settled into their beds. Scout's snores a soft counterpoint to the wind rattling the cabin's shutters. Outside, the forest was alive with nocturnal sounds, the hoot of an owl slicing through the darkness, the scurry of small creatures in the underbrush, and somewhere distant, the low growl of a predator staking its claim. By midnight, Willow stirred, letting out a weak bleat that tugged at Sarah's chest like a hook. She warmed more milk, this time mixing in a pinch of electrolytes from her kit. Dehydration was the silent killer for these babies. As the fawn nursed, Sarah's thoughts drifted to her own losses. The miscarriage had been a quiet devastation, announced in a sterile doctor's office with words like incompatible and next time. Mike had been her rock, holding her through the nights when grief clawed its way out in sobs, but the empty nursery they'd planned still echoed in her dreams. Rescuing Willow felt like a small defiance against that void, a chance to nurture something wild and unbroken. A sharp crack from the wood snapped her out of it. Not the natural snap of a branch under deer hooves, but something heavier, deliberate. Sarah froze, her hand pausing mid-stroke on Willow's head. The dogs lifted their ears, Buddy growling low in his throat. She eased to the window, peering into the inky blackness where her flashlight beam had long since faded. Mill Creek's forest wasn't known for bears this close to the trails. They stuck to higher elevations in spring, foraging for berries. But cougars prowled silently, and poachers occasionally slipped through the boundaries, drawn by the promise of antlers out of season. Her radio sat silent on the counter. No backup this late. "Easy, boy," she whispered to Buddy, clipping a leash to his collar just in case. She grabbed her flashlight and stepped onto the porch, the wooden boards creaking under her weight. The air was crisp, laced with the earthy scent of damp moss and decaying leaves. Shining the light into the trees, she swept it slowly, catching glimpses of ferns swaying in the breeze. Nothing. But the unease lingered, a prickling at the back of her neck. Sarah had patrolled these woods for years, mapping every hidden ravine and game trail, but night transformed familiarity into threat. She remembered a colleague's story from last summer, a ranger who'd startled a black market trapper, ending up with a sprained wrist and a confiscated snare line full of rabbits. Back inside, she bolted the door and double-checked the windows, her pulse steadying as she returned to Willow. The fawn had curled into a tighter ball, its spots blending with the shadows on the blanket. Sarah sank into the armchair, exhaustion pulling at her eyelids, but sleep wouldn't come. Instead, memories flooded in. Her childhood hikes with her dad in the Olympics, learning to read tracks in the mud, deer prints like tiny hearts stamped in the soil. He'd been a logger, calloused hands teaching her the balance between respecting the land and surviving on it. "The forest gives and takes, kiddo," he'd say, his voice gravelly from years of sawdust. He'd passed 5 years ago from lung issues, the irony not lost on her in this smoke-hazed world. The clock read 2:17 a.m. when headlights pierced the darkness, slicing through the cabin windows like accusatory fingers. Mike's truck rumbled up the drive, gravel spitting under the tires. Sarah rose, smoothing her hair as the door swung open, bringing in a gust of cool night air and the faint smell of diesel and city exhaust. Mike Jenkins, broad-shouldered at 35, with a firefighter's build honed from hauling hoses and climbing ladders, dropped his keys on the hook with a tired clink. His dark hair was tousled, stubble shadowing his jaw from the long shift. "Hey, babe," he said, pulling her into a hug that smelled of coffee and faint sweat. "Rough one in the city. Structure fire in Capitol Hill, nothing major but dragged on." His eyes, the color of storm clouds, scanned the room and landed on the box by the fire. Willow stirred at the new voice, lifting her head with a soft snort. Mike's brow furrowed, a mix of surprise and that familiar caution he reserved for her ranger impulses. "What's this? You said quick look, not bringing home strays." Sarah filled him in, words tumbling out as she gestured to the fawn. "Storm separated her, Mike. She's too weak to leave out there. Rehab in the morning." He knelt beside the box, his large hand hovering before gently touching Willow's flank. The fawn didn't flinch, instead leaning into the warmth. Mike's expression softened, the lines of fatigue easing. He'd grown up in Mill Creek too, fishing the Snohomish River with his brothers, but his job pulled him toward the urban sprawl, where risks were calculated and contained. The wild, though, always found a way to bridge that gap. "She's a fighter, huh?" he murmured, glancing at Sarah with a knowing look. They both felt it, the unspoken pull of second chances. But as Mike stood to grab a beer from the fridge, another sound cut through the cabin. A distant rustle, closer this time like footsteps crunching leaves. The dogs bristled again, and Sarah's radio finally crackled to life. "Jenkins. Got reports of suspicious activity near your sector. Possible illegal camping. Stay vigilant." Mike set the bottle down, untouched, his jaw tightening. The forest, benevolent earlier, now whispered warnings. Willow bleated softly, as if sensing the shift, and Sarah scooped her up, cradling the warmth against her chest. The night was far from over, and whatever lurked in the dark seemed determined to remind them that rescues came with shadows attached. As the three of them, human, man, and fawn, huddled in the firelight, the bond forming between them felt both precious and perilously thin, tested by the unseen threats pressing in from the woods beyond. The first hints of dawn filtered through the cabin's curtains, painting the wooden floors in soft grays and golds. Sarah hadn't slept more than an hour, her body curled protectively around Willow's box by the dying embers of the fire. Mike had taken the couch, his snores a steady rumble that grounded her in the midst of the night's unease. The radio's warning about suspicious activity lingered like a fog, but exhaustion had finally claimed them both, the forest outside falling into a deceptive quiet. Willow, for her part, had settled into a deeper sleep, her breathing even now, the warmth of the cabin working its slow magic on her chilled frame. Sarah stirred as the clock chimed 5:30 a.m., the soft chime pulling her upright. She rubbed the sleep from her eyes and checked the Fawn first. Its coat was drying, the mud flaking off in patches, revealing the clean, spotted fur beneath. A small victory. Mike was already up, moving quietly in the kitchen, the percolator bubbling with fresh coffee. He handed her a mug, black and steaming, his free hand squeezing her shoulder. "You look like hell, Sarah, but that little one's looking better. Plan for the day?" "Drive to Everett after breakfast," she replied, sipping the bitter brew that chased away the last cobwebs. "Vet'll assess her. Start proper rehab. I called the center at first light. They're expecting us by 8. Her voice carried the weight of routine, but her eyes betrayed the reluctance. Handing Willow over meant letting go, and after the night's vigil, that felt like severing a thread she'd only just woven. Mike nodded, glancing out the window where the trees stood sentinel in the morning mist. "And the radio chatter? You gonna report that rustling?" "Already did, before you got home. Supervisor thinks it's probably just campers straying off trail, but I'll patrol the sector on my way out. Make sure nothing's amiss." She didn't mention the knot in her gut, the way the sounds had felt too purposeful, like eyes watching from the shadows. Mill Creek's woods attracted all sorts: weekend warriors with their ATVs, families picnicking by the creeks. But spring brought out the opportunists too, hunters ignoring seasons, or worse, those trafficking in wildlife for profit. They ate a quick breakfast of oatmeal and toast, the dog circling under the table for scraps. Willow woke with a tentative bleat, her legs kicking feebly as Sarah offered the bottle again. This time, the Fawn took to it eagerly, her small mouth working with surprising strength. Mike watched, a half-smile tugging at his lips. "Reminds me of that stray cat we bottle-fed back in college. You always were the one with the soft spot for the underdogs." Sarah chuckled softly, but it didn't reach her eyes. "This isn't a pet, Mike. She's wild, needs to go back to her world." Yet as Willow nuzzled closer, pressing her damp nose against Sarah's wrist, the words rang hollow. The miscarriage's shadow loomed large in quiet moments like this, a reminder of what she'd lost and what this tiny life represented, a fleeting chance to mend something broken. By 6:45, they loaded Willow into the back of Sarah's Forest Service truck, the padded box secured in the cargo area with bungee cords. The Fawn blinked up at her through the slats, unresisting now, as if sensing the safety in her rescuer's presence. Mike kissed Sarah goodbye at the door, his arms lingering around her waist. "Drive safe. Call me when you drop her off, and watch your back out there." "I will," she promised, climbing into the cab. The engine roared to life, gravel crunching as she pulled onto the winding forest road. The drive to the east trailhead was short, just enough to shake off the cabin's coziness and re-enter ranger mode. She radioed her position. "Jenkins en route to Sector 7 for visual check. ETA patrol complete, 7:15. The road hugged the hillside, flanked by towering cedars whose branches formed a cathedral ceiling overhead. Morning light slanted through, illuminating dew-kissed ferns and the occasional flash of wildlife, a squirrel darting across the path, a flock of Steller's jays squawking in protest. Sarah kept her speed low, eyes scanning for signs of disturbance. Trampled underbrush, discarded trash, or the telltale glint of metal traps. Nothing yet. But as she rounded a bend near the old logging cutoff, her tires hit something soft. A fresh pile of branches dragged across the lane, not quite a blockade, but enough to slow traffic. She braked hard, heart skipping. Stepping out, she shone her flashlight over the debris, even though daylight was breaking. No wires or snares, just limbs from nearby alders cut clean with a saw. Odd. Campers didn't bother with this. It screamed deliberate. Pushing the branches aside, she noted the tracks in the mud, tire marks wider than her truck's, with deep treads like those on a heavy-duty ATV. Illegals, maybe, using the cutoff to access restricted areas. Shaking it off, Sarah continued, the truck bouncing over ruts as the road narrowed. The patrol loop took her deeper into the woods, past the meadow where Willow might have been born, its wildflowers just budding in the chill air. She parked at an overlook, grabbing her binoculars to sweep the valley below. That's when she saw it. Smoke, thin and acrid, curling from a hidden clearing a half-mile off trail. Not a campfire. Too controlled, too early for legal fires with the burn ban still in effect. Her pulse quickened. Grabbing her pack, she hiked down a faint game trail, boots sinking into the loamy soil. The scent grew stronger, mingling with something sharper. Motor oil, perhaps, or the tang of chemicals. Voices drifted on the breeze, low and muffled, two men by the sound of it. Sarah crouched behind a fallen log, peering through the ferns. There, in the clearing, sat a battered pickup, its bed loaded with crates. One man, burly with a beard like tangled wire, unloaded what looked like pelts, deer hides, fresh and bloody, while the other, slimmer and twitchy, checked a snare line strung between trees. Poachers. Her stomach twisted. Washington's antler trade was a dirty underbelly, drawing out-of-staters willing to risk fines for black market bucks. But this was worse. The crates held more than hides, cages, small ones, with the faint whimpers of trapped animals. Rabbits, or smaller fawns. Rage bubbled up, hot and righteous, but protocol screamed caution. No backup for 20 minutes at best. She edged closer, radio whispering in her pocket. Dispatch, this is Jenkins. Possible poaching activity at coordinates 47, 89N, 121, 92W. Request immediate support. I'm observing. The response was garbled, static from the hills, but affirmative. Heart pounding, Sarah watched the bearded man pause, sniffing the air like a hound. He muttered something to his partner, gesturing toward the trees. Had they heard her truck? Or was it the wind? In that frozen moment, a rustle erupted nearby. Not from the poachers, but from the underbrush. Willow's mother? No. Something else. A coyote, gaunt from winter, slinking through the ferns with yellow eyes fixed on the clearing. The men spotted it too, grabbing rifles from the truck cab. Sarah's breath caught. Intervention now meant exposure, but letting them shoot unchecked. She burst from cover, voice booming with authority. U.S. Forest Service, drop the weapons and step away from the vehicle. The poachers spun, shock widening their faces. The slim one fumbled his rifle, but the bearded one raised his, finger twitching on the trigger. Time slowed. The crack of a shot echoed, splintering bark inches from her head. Sarah dove behind a stump, radioing urgently. Shots fired! Need backup now! Chaos erupted. The coyote bolted, the men scrambling into the truck as Sarah fired a warning shot from her service pistol into the air. Tires spun, kicking up dirt, and the vehicle tore off down a side trail, leaving crates scattered and the air thick with gunpowder. Sarah rose shakily, checking herself. No hits. Just adrenaline surging like fire in her veins. The clearing was a mess. Bloody pelts, empty snares, and one crate cracked open, revealing a terrified jackrabbit that hopped free into the woods. Her hands trembled as she secured the scene, photographing evidence with her phone. Willow waited back at the truck, oblivious, but this brush with danger cast a long shadow. The poachers knew her face now, and the forest, once a sanctuary, felt laced with peril. As sirens wailed in the distance, Sarah leaned against a tree, the morning sun warming her skin, but doing little to thaw the ice of what might come next. The rescue that started with a lost fawn had spiraled into something far deadlier, pulling her deeper into the wild's unforgiving heart. The wail of sirens grew louder, slicing through the morning mist like a lifeline Sarah wasn't sure she deserved. She holstered her pistol with steady hands, though her knees felt like jelly beneath her. The poacher's truck had vanished into the underbrush, leaving a rooster tail of dust and the acrid bite of exhaust hanging in the air. She scanned the clearing again, her ranger training kicking in amid the adrenaline crash, evidence first, emotion second. The scattered crates lay like broken promises. One held a half-eaten raccoon carcass, another a tangle of wire snares stained with blood. The jackrabbit had bolted into the ferns, its white tail a fleeting ghost, but the pelts, 3 mule deer hides, still tacky with drying gore, told a story of greed that twisted her gut. Backup arrived in a blur of flashing lights, 2 Forest Service SUVs and a county sheriff's cruiser, their tires churning the soft earth as they skidded to a halt at the trail's edge. Deputy Harlan Reyes, a stocky man in his 40s with a mustache that curled like a question mark, was the first out, his hand on his holster. "Jenkins, you okay?" Dispatch said shots fired. Sarah nodded, wiping sweat from her brow with the back of her hand. "I'm good." They rabbited, bearded guy and his skinny buddy, older Ford pickup, maybe a '98 model, headed west on the cutoff. Her voice came out clipped, professional, but inside her mind raced. Willow was still in the truck, a half-mile back, and every second here meant delaying the rehab drop-off. Reyes radioed the details while his partner, a young deputy named Lisa Chen, began cordoning off the site with yellow tape that fluttered like caution flags in the breeze. Reyes knelt by the pelts, his face hardening. "Poachers all right. Black market's hot this season. Antler prices up with the Asian trade. You confront 'em alone?" "Had to," Sarah said, helping Chen bag the snares. "Saw the smoke, heard voices, thought it was just illegal camping till I got eyes on." She didn't mention the coyote or how the animal's opportunistic slink had mirrored her own rash decision to burst from cover. Rangers weren't cops, they were stewards, meant to observe and report. But standing there, watching those men handle caged lives like commodities had ignited something primal, a fury born from years of cleaning up after human folly. The team worked methodically, photographing the scene, logging tire tracks in the mud that would lead forensics to a match if they were lucky. Sarah contributed what she could, her statements crisp as she recounted the confrontation. The raised rifle, the warning shot, the engine's roar as they fled. But her thoughts kept drifting to the truck, to the small life waiting patiently in its padded box. Willow's rescue felt distant now, overshadowed by this mess, yet it tethered her to the moment. If those poachers were local, they might circle back, drawn by rumors of a nosy ranger with a soft spot for fawns. By 8:15 the scene was secured, and Reyes clapped her on the shoulder. "Good work, Jenkins. We'll handle the follow-up, get you cleared for the day, but write up a full report by noon." Sarah managed a tight smile, the weight of paperwork already pressing like an anchor. She radioed the rehab center. "Delayed 20. En route now." The coordinator's voice was understanding. Wildlife waits for no one. But Sarah heard the undertone of concern. Fawns like Willow didn't have margins for error. Driving back to the patrol point, the forest road seemed narrower, the cedars closing in like judgmental witnesses. She parked and checked on Willow immediately, opening the cargo door to find the fawn blinking up at her. Ears perked at the sound of her voice. "Hey girl, sorry for the detour." Willow nudged her hand through the slats, a soft, trusting gesture that cracked the armor Sarah had built during the standoff. She offered a quick bottle, the warm milk vanishing as Willow suckled with renewed vigor. The sight eased the knot in Sarah's chest, a reminder that not all interventions ended in gunfire. The drive to Everett unfolded under a sky clearing to blue, the Cascades receding in the rear view as Sarah merged onto Highway 2. Traffic was light for a weekday, just semis hauling logs and commuters in beat-up sedans. Her mind replayed the morning in loops. The bearded man's snarl, the rifle's glint, the way the air had hummed with potential violence. Mike texted midway. "Heard about the incident on the scanner. You all right?" And she replied with a thumbs-up emoji, too raw to type more. He knew her well enough not to push, but the worry lines would etch deeper when she got home. The rehab center sat on the outskirts of Everett, a low-slung building surrounded by aviaries and enclosures that buzzed with the chatter of recovering birds and the rustle of penned animals. Sarah pulled into the lot, gravel popping under her tires, and carried Willow's box inside with careful steps. The receptionist, a wiry woman named Carla with owl-like glasses, greeted her warmly. "Sarah, bring her back here. Vet's ready." In the exam room, Dr. Elena Vasquez, a veterinarian in her 50s with salt and pepper hair tied back in a practical ponytail, took over gently, Willow submitted to the checkup without protest, her legs steadier now as Elena listened to her heart with a stethoscope. Dehydrated but responsive. Good call on the electrolytes. We'll tube feed if needed, get her on a formula regimen. Any signs of injury? Just exhaustion and exposure, Sarah said, hovering by the table. Found her alone after the storm. No mother in sight. Elena nodded, her hands deft as she administered a vitamin shot. The room smelled of antiseptic and hay, a far cry from the cabin's wood smoke, and Sarah felt the pull of separation like a physical ache. Willow's eyes met hers one last time, wide and questioning, before the Fawn was crated for quarantine. As Sarah signed the release forms, Elena placed a hand on her arm. You did right bringing her in, but be careful out there. These woods are getting edgier. Heard about your poacher run-in on the radio. Connect anything? Sarah shook her head, though doubt flickered. Not yet, just bad timing. But as she walked back to her truck, the pieces nagged. The branch blockade on the road, positioned right after she'd rescued Willow. Coincidence? Or had someone been watching the forest's edge, waiting for vulnerability? The return drive blurred into afternoon, Sarah's patrol radio crackling with updates. Poacher's truck spotted near Granite Falls, a bolo issued statewide. She stopped at a roadside diner in Monroe for coffee, the Formica counter sticky under her elbows as she scrolled news on her phone. Local forums buzzed with speculation. Illegal trappers hitting deer populations hard. Rehab centers overwhelmed. It fueled her resolve, but exhaustion crept in. A bone-deep weariness from the night's vigil and the morning's terror. By late afternoon, she was home, the cabin's familiar outline a balm against the chaos. Mike was off shift early, waiting on the porch with Buddy and Scout at his feet. He pulled her into a fierce hug before she could speak, his voice muffled against her hair. Scared the hell out of me. Don't do that again. Wasn't planning to, she murmured, burying her face in his shirt. Inside, over reheated stew, she recounted the day. The poachers' faces etched in her memory. Willow's trusting nudge. Mike listened, his firefighter's calm masking the storm in his eyes. Sounds like you stirred a hornet's nest. What if they know where you live? The question hung heavy as dusk fell, the forest reclaiming its shadows. Sarah glanced out the window, the trees whispering secrets she couldn't decipher. Willow was safe now, in expert hands, but the rescue had unleashed ripples, dangerous ones, that lapped at their doorstep. As night deepened, Sarah lay awake beside Mike, the weight of the wild pressing close, wondering if the Fawn's plea had been a harbinger of trials yet to come. The bond she'd formed, fragile as a deer's first steps, now felt entangled in a web of threats, pulling her toward an uncertain dawn. The days following Willow's handover blurred into a tense routine, the cabin's warmth doing little to dispel the chill that had settled in Sarah's bones. She threw herself into patrols, mapping the poachers' likely routes with a fervor that bordered on obsession, her truck's odometer ticking higher as she crisscrossed the forest's veins. Mike's shifts pulled him away more often now, his concern manifesting in extra locks on the doors and a shotgun propped by the bed, relics from his rural upbringing that Sarah had once teased him about. The dogs sensed the shift too, pacing the porch at night, their ears pricked toward the rustling dark. Reports trickled in from the sheriff's office. The poacher's truck, a rusted '92 F-150 with mismatched plates, had been abandoned near the Snoqualmie River, torched to erase evidence. Fingerprints pulled a name, Ricky Harlan, a drifter with priors for wildlife violations in Oregon, and his partner, Eddie Voss, a local mechanic from Granite Falls with a rap sheet for petty theft. But they were ghosts now, slipping through the cracks like smoke. Deputy Reyes called Sarah twice, his voice gravelly over the line. We're shaking trees, Jenkins. Harlan's got ties to a ring out of Yakima, deer parts shipped east for traditional meds. You spot anything, you holler. She did spot things. Fresh ATV tracks gouging the east trail, a snare half buried near the creek she'd cleared just days before. Each discovery ratcheted her vigilance, turning every shadow into suspicion. At the station, colleagues clapped her on the back for the bust. Hero Ranger takes down the bad guys. But Sarah waved it off, the prey sitting uneasy. Heroes didn't lie awake replaying the rifle's crack, or jump at the snap of a twig while filling her coffee mug. And Willow? Updates from the rehab center came via email. The Fawn was gaining weight, her legs strengthening on a diet of specialized formula. Photos attached showed Willow in a grassy pen, nose buried in hay, those wide eyes staring at the camera as if remembering. Sarah saved them to her phone, a secret talisman against the fraying edges of her days. One evening, as rain pattered against the cabin roof like impatient fingers, Sarah sat at the kitchen table poring over maps. Red ink circled hot spots, the cutoff where she'd found the branches, the clearing of the poacher camp, even the meadow near where she'd first heard Willow's cry. Mike walked in from the garage, grease-streaked from tinkering with the truck's undercarriage, his flannel shirt rolled to his elbows. He dropped a kiss on her temple, peering at the sprawl of paper. Still hunting ghosts. Reyes said they're pinning it on Harlan, guys holed up in a motel off I-5, waiting for extradition. Sarah traced a line with her finger, connecting the dots. It's not just him. The blockade on the road, that was after I took Willow. What if they were watching, using the Fawn as bait, or, I don't know, testing the trails for interference? Her voice cracked on the last word. The theory sounding paranoid even to her. But the forest felt alive with intent now, its quiet paths laced with human malice. Mike pulled out a chair, his chair scraping the floorboards. Babe, you're the best ranger out there, but this is eating you. Remember that time in Yellowstone, your internship? You tracked a poacher for weeks, got the collar. You'll get this too. He reached for her hand, calluses rough from axe handles and hoses, grounding her in the solid reality of their life. But his eyes held the same shadows. He'd seen enough close calls in his line of work to know when worry festered into fear. The next morning broke clear and crisp, the kind of Washington day that lured hikers out in droves. Sarah's patrol took her up the North Fork Trail, a steep climb through old-growth hemlocks where sunlight dappled the forest floor like scattered coins. She hiked with purpose, pack-heavy with binoculars and a GPS unit, the air sharp with the scent of pine sap and wet earth from overnight dew. Buddy trotted at her heels. Scout stayed home today, her beagle nose too prone to distractions, his lab mix energy a welcome distraction from the solitude. Halfway up, near a switchback overlook, Sarah paused to catch her breath, the valley sprawling below like a green quilt, stitched with silver creeks. That's when she heard it. Not a bleat, but a low, distressed huff, carried on the wind from a thicket of salal bushes. Her heart stuttered, echoes of that first night. Drawing her sidearm instinctively, she approached slowly, boots silent on the needle carpet. "Who's there?" she called, voice steady but laced with authority. The bushes parted and out stumbled a doe, mule deer, by the black-tipped tail and oversized ears. Her flank gashed and limping, blood matting the tawny fur. Panic flashed in her eyes as she locked onto Sarah, then bolted awkwardly toward the trail's edge, only to stumble again. No fawn in sight, but the timing twisted like a knife. This had to be Willow's mother. The storm's chaos, the separation, it fit. Sarah's mind raced. Injured wildlife needed intervention, but a spooked doe could charge if cornered. Kneeling at a safe distance, she pulled a wildlife whistle from her pack, the shrill blast meant to deter without harm. The doe froze, ears flicking, then veered into denser cover, vanishing into the underbrush. Sarah followed at a jog, radioing her position. Jenkins on North Fork, mile 2. Injured doe, possible relation to recent orphan. Pursuing to assess. Static answered. Then confirmation, back up en route, but 20 minutes out. Deeper in, the trail faded into game paths, ferns slapping at her jeans as she tracked the doe's prints. Staggered, with smears of red in the mud. The wound looked like a snare cut, barbed wire or a poorly set trap, tearing flesh on escape. Sarah's pulse thrummed. If this was the mother, Willow's survival odds just plummeted without her. And if poachers were involved? She pushed the thought down, focusing on the signs. Broken branches, a tuft of fur snagged on thorns. The doe had holed up in a shallow ravine, panting against a mossy boulder, her sides heaving. Sarah approached from downwind, murmuring nonsense words to mask her human scent. "Easy, girl. Let me help." The doe lifted her head, nostrils flaring, but didn't bolt. Exhaustion or trust, Sarah couldn't tell. She radioed for a dart gun from the station's cache, but as she waited, a new sound intruded. The whine of an ATV engine, distant but closing from the ridge above. Her blood ran cold. Poachers? Or just off-roaders ignoring signs? She hunkered down, pulling Buddy close to silence his growl. The engine revved, then cut off abruptly, followed by voices. Two, male, rough-edged. "Told you, Eddie. That ranger bitch is poking around again. Saw her truck at the trailhead." Sarah's grip tightened on her radio. Harlan and Voss, or copycats emboldened by the chaos. The doe tensed, sensing the threat, and Sarah made a split decision. Whistle again, loud and piercing. The animal lurched to her feet, staggering uphill away from the voices, drawing the men's attention if they were near. Footsteps crunched. Boots, not paws, heading her way. Sarah whispered to Buddy, "Stay," and slipped behind a fallen log, heart hammering like a war drum. Peering through the leaves, she saw them. Not the originals, but two younger men, locals by their Mill Creek High hoodies, one carrying a shotgun slung casual over his shoulder. Wannabes, thrill-seekers dipping into the trade. The bearded one scanned the ravine, eyes narrowing on the doe's trail. Blood, fresh kill if we're lucky. Rage surged, hot and unfiltered. These kids, barely out of their teens, playing at destruction in her woods. Sarah rose, voice cutting like a blade. "Forest Service, weapons down, hands up!" The men whirled, shock paling their faces. The shotgun clattered to the ground as they bolted, crashing through the brush like startled elk. Sarah pursued long enough to note their direction, toward an illegal access road, then radioed it in, breath ragged. Backup arrived as she tended the doe, tranquilizer dart administered with shaking hands. The animal slumped gently, and Sarah cleaned the wound as best she could, applying antibiotic salve from her kit. Vets would airlift her to rehab if she stabilized. Reunite with Willow, maybe, if fate allowed. But as the chopper's thump echoed overhead, Sarah sat back on her heels, the forest's pulse sinking with her own exhaustion. Word spread fast in Mill Creek. The ranger's latest takedown, 2 locals in cuffs for attempted poaching. Mike greeted her that night with pride in his eyes, but Sarah saw the toll. The lines etched deeper around her mouth, the way sleep came in fits. Willow's mother was en route to Everett, prognosis guarded but alive. Yet the web tightened, more eyes on the trails, more whispers of retaliation from the fringes. The Fawn's plea had started a chain, linking loss and redemption in ways Sarah couldn't untangle. As rain resumed its tattoo on the roof, she held Mike close, the wild's embrace both fierce and unforgiving, promising no easy resolutions. The weeks dragged on like the relentless pull of the tide, each day carving deeper grooves into Sarah's resolve. The cabin, once a sanctuary of creaking floors and wood smoke-scented evenings, now felt exposed, its windows like eyes staring into the encroaching woods. Mike had taken to patrolling the perimeter himself on off days, his firefighter's flashlight sweeping the tree line long after dark, while Sarah's patrols extended into overtime, her truck a constant rumble on the gravel roads. The poaching ring's tendrils reached further than she'd imagined, Yakima suppliers feeding a pipeline to urban markets in Seattle and beyond, where powdered antlers fetched prices that mocked the forest's quiet dignity. Deputy Reyes kept her looped in. Harlan and Voss were in custody, but the younger duo from the ravine had lawyered up, claiming they were just hunting for fun. Fun. The word soured in her mouth like bad coffee. Willow's updates were a lifeline amid the storm. The rehab center's emails arrived like clockwork. The Fawn was thriving, her coat gleaming under the enclosure's heat lamps, legs kicking with the promise of wild sprints. And the doe, confirmed through matching spots and a microchip from a prior sighting, had stabilized after surgery. Elena Vasquez's notes were optimistic. Mother and babe showing interest in each other during supervised intros. Release possible in 2 weeks if all goes well. Sarah printed the photos, pinning them to the fridge beside Mike's shift schedules. a mosaic of hope that clashed with the red-inked maps still cluttering the table. Reuniting them would be a triumph, a full circle to that stormy night, but doubt gnawed at her. The forest had changed, its paths now hummed with the echo of engines and the snap of hidden snares. One crisp autumn morning, as leaves turned the understory to flame, Sarah's radio crackled during her routine loop near the North Fork. "Jenkins, we've got a tip. Anonymous call about activity at the old mill site. Coordinates incoming. Proceed with caution. Could be our Yakima boys making a run." Her grip tightened on the wheel, the truck's engine growling as she veered onto a rutted access road, dust pluming behind her like a warning flag. The mill site was a relic from the logging boom, rusted machinery overgrown with blackberries, a forgotten corner where the Snohomish River murmured over polished stones. Perfect for a handoff, remote, with escape routes snaking into the hills. She parked a quarter-mile out, slinging her pack and clipping the radio to her belt. Buddy stayed in the cab this time, his whines muffled as she slipped into the trees, moving like a shadow through the ferns. The air carried the tang of river water and something sharper, exhaust, fresh and oily. Voices filtered through the rustle. 3 men, accents thick with Eastern Washington drawl, haggling over crates stacked by a derelict conveyor. Sarah crouched behind a stump, binoculars pressed to her eyes. No uniforms, just flannel and jeans, but the cargo told the tale. Pelts bundled tight, antlers protruding like accusing fingers, and smaller boxes that mewed faintly, live captures for the trade. Her heart pounded a steady rhythm, years of training channeling fear into focus. She keyed the radio. Visual on suspects at mill site. 3 individuals, multiple crates. Requesting sheriff backup. ETA? The response buzzed back. 10 minutes. Hold position. 10 minutes. An eternity in poacher time. As she watched one man, a stocky figure with a Yakima brewer's cap, pried open a crate, revealing a pair of young does, their eyes wild with terror. Sarah's stomach churned. These weren't just trophies, they were breeding stock, stripped from the herd to fuel a cycle of loss. Willow's face flashed in her mind, those trusting eyes, and rage ignited like dry tinder. She couldn't wait. Bursting from cover, she shouted, "U.S. Forest Service! Hands where I can see them now!" The men froze, then scattered like roaches, crates tumbling into the mud. The leader lunged for a duffel by the truck, yanking out a pistol that glinted cruel in the dappled light. Sarah dove behind the conveyor, bark exploding from a nearby alder as the shot rang out. "Dispatch, armed suspect, shots fired, need that backup yesterday." Her own pistol barked in response, a warning round kicking up dirt at their feet. One man tripped over a root, sprawling face first, while the others piled into the truck, engine roaring to life. The vehicle lurched forward, tires spinning in the gravel, barreling straight toward her position. Sarah rolled aside, the fender clipping her pack and sending her sprawling into the riverbank. Cold water soaked her boots as she scrambled up, firing another shot that shattered the taillight. The truck fishtailed onto the main road, vanishing in a cloud of dust. But the fallen man, the leader, scrambled to his knees, hands raised, face pale with surrender. "Don't shoot. It's over, all right?" Backup screeched in moments later, Reyes and Chen piling out with weapons drawn. They cuffed the man, Victor Ruiz, a mid-level supplier with a warrant from Idaho, while Sarah caught her breath, ribs aching from the near miss. The crates yielded evidence. 8 animals freed on site, a ledger scribbled with contacts stretching to Bellevue black markets. As animal control arrived to triage the does, Sarah leaned against the mill's rusted frame, the river's rush a soothing counterpoint to her thundering pulse. Reyes clapped her shoulder. "Damn, Jenkins, you're making a habit of this. Rings crumbling, Ruiz'll sing like a bird." But triumph felt hollow as she drove home, the sun dipping low and painting the peaks in blood-red hues. Mike was waiting, his embrace fierce enough to bruise. "Saw the call on the scanner. Thought I'd lost you." Over dinner, simple venison stew from a legal hunt, irony not lost. They talked it through, his hand steady on hers. The poaching threat was fracturing, arrests mounting. But Sarah felt the cost. Nightmares of rifle cracks, a wariness that shadowed every hike. Willow and her mother were prepped for release, Elena confirmed, a soft launch into a monitored meadow. Sarah volunteered for the detail, a chance to witness the closure. The release day dawned misty, the rehab team's van bumping along the forest road to the very meadow where it had all begun. Sarah arrived early, heart full as Elena unloaded the crates. Willow emerged first, tentative steps into the grass, nose twitching at the wild scents. Then the doe, her flank scarred but healed, ears perking at the fawn's soft snort. They met nose to nose, a nuzzle that sealed the bond the storm had nearly severed. Sarah watched from the tree line, tears blurring the scene, Mike's arm around her waist. "You did this," he whispered. The pair vanished into the brush, a ripple in the green, free. Yet as they turned back, a final shadow lingered. Sarah's phone buzzed, a tip from Ruiz's interrogation. The original poachers had targeted the area after spotting her cabin light that night, using Willow's cries to scout for easy interference. The blockade, the rustles. It had all been a probe, a way to intimidate the ranger meddling in their game. No more ghosts, just men brought low by their own greed. But the forest bore scars, silent testaments to the battles fought. Sarah squeezed Mike's hand, the weight lifting slightly, though the wild's lessons etched deep. Mercy came hard-won, and vigilance was the price of peace. As evening fell, the cabin glowed warm against the twilight, the dogs barking joyfully at their return. Sarah stepped onto the porch, breathing in the pine-scented air, the meadow's echo a quiet victory. The fawn's plea had woven them all into its tale, of loss reclaimed, dangers faced, and a fragile harmony restored. But in the rustle of leaves, she heard the ongoing whisper, the woods never truly slept, and neither would she. Months passed like the slow melt of snow in the Cascades, softening the sharp edges of that tumultuous spring into a tentative peace. Sarah's patrols continued, but the forest felt lighter now, its paths less haunted by the specter of hidden threats. The poaching ring had unraveled under the weight of arrests and confessions. Ruiz's ledger had led to raids in Yakima and a bust in Seattle's underground markets, where velvet antlers were traded like illicit gold. Harlan and Voss faced federal charges, their operation dismantled crate by crate, while the younger locals from the ravine got community service and a lifetime ban from public lands. Deputy Reyes sent her a case file summary with a handwritten note. "Couldn't have cracked it without you, Jenkins. Owe you a beer." Sarah kept the note tucked in her desk drawer at the station, a quiet anchor amid the paperwork that piled up like autumn leaves. Her days settled into a rhythm of educating school groups on wildlife ethics, clearing invasive ivy from trails, and monitoring deer migrations with trail cams that captured glimpses of Willow and her mother grazing in the meadows. The fawn, no longer little, her spots fading into the sleek brown of adolescence, had grown bold, her mother's watchful presence a shadow in the footage. Sarah reviewed the videos on slow evenings, the grainy images flickering on her laptop screen as Mike stirred soup on the stove, the aroma of carrots and thyme filling the cabin. One crisp October afternoon, as golden light slanted through the evergreens, Sarah hiked the North Fork Trail alone, her boots crunching over frost-kissed needles. Buddy had stayed home, his age catching up in shorter legs and a preference for porch naps. The air was sharp, carrying the faint tang of wood smoke from distant chimneys in Mill Creek, and she paused at the switchback overlook, the valley unfolding below like a hand-painted postcard. This was where she'd tracked the injured doe, where the rustle of danger had nearly pulled her under. Now the ravine lay serene, ferns curling back from summer's growth, the river a silver thread weaving through the green. A soft snort from the thicket drew her eyes. There, at the edge of the salal bushes, stood Willow, her head high and ears alert. The doe lingered nearby, nosing at a patch of clover, but it was the yearling who approached, tentative steps carrying her closer to the trail. Sarah froze, heart swelling in her chest, as Willow sniffed the air, those once wide eyes now sharp with curiosity. No fear, just a flicker of recognition in the way she tilted her head, as if the human scent stirred echoes of warmth and milk bottles in the night. Sarah extended a hand slowly, palm up, whispering, "Hey girl, look at you, strong now." Willow edged nearer, her warm breath ghosting over Sarah's fingers before darting back to her mother with a playful bound. Tears pricked Sarah's eyes as she watched them melt into the trees, the encounter a gift from the wild's unpredictable heart. It was closure, unscripted and profound, mending the frayed threads of that first desperate bleat. Back at the cabin, she shared the story with Mike over mugs of cider by the fire, his laughter rumbling as he pulled her close. "She's got your spirit, stubborn and kind." The miscarriage's shadow had faded some, softened by Willow's survival, and the quiet ways they'd begun talking about trying again. No rush, just possibility blooming like spring ferns. Winter came gently that year, blanketing the forest in white that muffled the world's edges. Sarah's promotion to lead ranger for the sector arrived in a manila envelope, her supervisor citing her exemplary handling of wildlife crises and enforcement actions. The ceremony was low-key, a potluck at the station with sheet cake and handshakes, but Mike beamed from the back, scout's leash in one hand and a bouquet of wildflowers in the other. "To more rescues," he toasted later, clinking glasses on the porch as snowflakes danced in the porch light. Yet the lessons lingered, etched deep as tree rings. Sarah taught them in her outreach programs, showing kids photos of snares and pelts alongside Willow's rehab shots, emphasizing the balance between human curiosity and the wild's sovereignty. "The forest gives us beauty," she'd say, her voice steady with conviction. "But it demands respect. One lost fawn can ripple out to save a whole herd, or lose it." The kids listened wide-eyed, their questions a spark of hope amid the headlines of environmental strains. As the first anniversary of that stormy night approached, Sarah returned to the meadow alone, the ground soft underfoot from thawing snow. The air hummed with early birdsong, and she sat on a fallen log, closing her eyes to the sun's warmth. No bleats echoed now, just the rustle of life persisting, squirrels chattering, wind sighing through the branches. Willow was out there somewhere, perhaps with her own fawn by now, carrying forward the cycle Sarah had helped preserve. The poacher's shadows had receded, but vigilance remained her compass, a quiet fire that warmed rather than consumed. In the cabin that evening, with Mike firing up the grill for an early barbecue and the dogs romping in the yard, Sarah felt the full weight of gratitude. The little lost fawn's plea had tested her, forged her anew, and reminded her that in the heart of the wild, connections formed in the unlikeliest ways, fragile, fierce, and enduring. The forest whispered on, a living testament to resilience, and Sarah listened, ready for whatever came next. Leave a comment sharing what you thought about this story.